Hi, this is Kayla Hicks, author of Kale Stone and Outliers Tale. I thought it would be a nice treat to be able to post the first chapter on my author's page here on Facebook. Alright, so here we go. Chapter 1. The cool stream slowly drifted around my hand, chilling my fingers. It was a welcoming feeling with the muggy air around me. I watched as bits of grass floated past me. I followed the path of floating bladed grass with my eyes and watched as it rested on a plump toad. There he sat on a rock with closed eyes, unmoving. He looked as if he didn't care about anything else. Neither the increasing wind nor the rolling stream around him. He was just there. I quietly propped myself up and inched toward him. He still sat unmoving, slowly breathing in and out. When I got closer, his eyes cracked open only slightly, trying not to be seen. I instantly froze, and his eyes closed once again. I reached my hand out and lowered it into the water, trying not to make a sound. "Ah!" someone screamed. I jumped, my hand smacking the water. Suddenly the toad was gone, just like that. I stood and looked around for the source, and then I saw our house to my far right. There were 5 figures standing near it, and I couldn't make them out from this far away. Something's wrong, I thought. We never have visitors. I started running as panic rose in the back of my throat like acid. I could hear my feet thudding against the dirt-packed ground. The wind whistled past my ears as the coming storm got stronger. My breathing was starting to come out as a jagged sound. As it got closer, I could now see 3 men and my parents. The men were dressed in black, and they regarded their captives with a stone-cold gaze. My father was on his knees looking up at them. As for my mother, she stood broken, her hair a mess, her eyes red with tears, and her arms hanging at her sides in defeat. She had frozen, like the toad in the stream. All heads turned my direction when they heard my thudding footsteps. I slowed as my stride and tried to keep slow my rapid breaths. "Oh, what a shame! You have a son?" the man in front of my father said. My father kept his eyes on me, but his eyes were unreadable. It was as if he was trying to tell me something I wasn't understanding. "This doesn't change a thing, Terrence," the man snapped. "The point is, you are a highly valuable asset, and Kale Stone wants you back. You can either go willingly with us, or I can think of other means to make it work." My father tore his gaze away from me and looked at the man. "Okay, I'll go." "Let me say goodbye to my wife and son first," he said. The man clicked his tongue and held up his finger. "I have a better idea. We'll just take all of you. This way, you don't miss your family, and then you'll have a little more incentive to keep working." I looked to my mother. I could see fresh tears rolling down her face. "No," my father said, "just me." The man looked at my father. The intent in his eyes were clear. "We have valuables. You can take those instead," my mother said quietly. The man's head snapped up in my mother's direction. He tilted his head in thought. "Interesting." My chest felt tight. I wanted to do something, anything. "Why do you want my father?" "Okay, go inside and find anything of value," he said to the man to his left. The man stalked off and returned with jewelry, medals, and trinkets. He took them over, and the group's leader seemed pleased with the haul. "I wonder what we will say. Was it that we couldn't find you? Or that you died on the way there?" he pondered. My mother stepped over and grabbed my arm. She quickly shoved me into the house and shut the door. She had a look of terror in her eyes. I tried to look under the door, to no avail. So I pushed my ear against the door. I could feel the unevenness of the wood, and couldn't hear anything. It was too quiet. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, so loud that I fell backward. I quickly scrambled to my feet and wrenched open the door. I was greeted by the sight of my mother kneeling next to my father, who lay on the ground. The blood that poured out of him turned the ground an odd color. She was gently patting his face as if she were trying to wake him up. I bolted into the sitting position on my cot. I was drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. This happened every time I had this dream. "Mom, you need to wake up," I whispered. She didn't move. I watched to see if she was breathing. I was relieved to see her eyes open slightly. She had dark circles under her eyes, which deepened when she narrowed her gaze at me. "I was having the best dream. Why did you wake me?" she joked. "You need to eat or drink something, Mom. You haven't had anything in 2 days," I begged. "Fine, but I'll just have some water. That will fill me up just fine," she said. I sighed, shaking my head. "Oh, please, you need to stop worrying so much. For all you know, when you're out and about, I was eating all of our food. I left all the dishes for you to clean," she joked again. "This is serious, Mom. You're getting worse." "I wish I had medication from Kale Stone. Then you'd be better," I said. I walked over to the pitcher on the table and poured her some water. As I brought it back, I saw she was trying to sit up. I helped her the rest of the way and gave her water. "If you keep making that face, you're going to get worry lines all over your face like an old man." How will you ever meet a girl then? She asked. Mother, I'm 17. I don't think that's going to happen for a very long time. Well then, don't you dare smile or even I won't recognize you. I'll yell, where is my grumpy son? There's a smiling intruder in my home, she said. I had to laugh at that. This was the most I'd gotten out of her in 2 weeks. How are you feeling today? I asked. Better. Maybe this is starting to turn around, she said and smiled. I nodded as she drank her water. She had been sick for months. She was in her 40s now, which made her fall into the older population. People out here lived to be 65, maybe 70. Once you turned 40 in the outskirts, you were at risk for the virus. She couldn't eat, and she could hardly drink or sleep. It caused her to run high fevers and terrible nightmares as well. The truth of the matter was she wasn't fine, and we both knew it. She handed her cup and rested her hand back on the wall. She weakly shook her head. I think I should sleep a little more. The more I rest, the better I'll get. I'll eat when I get up later. We both knew she wouldn't. I helped her lie back down and shut the door on my way out. I needed to do something with myself. I wanted to feel like I was helping in some way. I went around the kitchen and gathered all the medicinal herb bottles. I also grabbed the wooden dolls they carved. I would take them to the market and get more medication. When I was done, I latched the door and locked it so Mom would be safe. The outskirts were dangerous. And you could never be too careful. Even though we lived in a quieter area, I was always felt on edge. I turned away from our home and scanned the area. Not a soul in sight. I could see the desert to my right and dirt to my left. There was also Kale Stone looming in the distance. Even though we were miles away, it still looked huge. It was as if they decided they needed to remind everyone in the outskirts that we weren't inside and that we weren't one of them. I started on my way toward the market, and the market was small but valuable out here. There were 7 stalls to go to with food, materials, and medicine. The vendors lived in their stalls out of fear that someone would come and take everything. It was too risky to live separate from your belongings. That was a luxury for people of Kale Stone. After I walked for about an hour, a group of people came into view. They were kind people, but my mother used to talk to them. My mother was a sort of doctor out here. She helped them deliver their baby a year ago. Their camp had 2 houses similar to ours, a mixture of wood and metals. They marked off their small settlement with stakes in the ground. As I walked by a man named Jason, he waved to me. He was roasting something over an open flame. After another hour of walking, the market came into view. No one was outside. It was rare that anyone was. It was mostly stragglers and the people who lived close by who came. I could feel the dolls and bottles gently swaying in my bag as I walked. I would need to make more items soon. Out here, you need things like these. In Kale Stone, people use money. In the outskirts, we traded. We had no use for money out here. And besides, people of the outskirts despised Kale Stone people, so they saw no need to try to be like them. I walked past 3 shops and spotted Henley's stall at the end. His door was closed, but I knew if I knocked, he would open the door. I could feel the wind picking up, strands of my shaggy hair which passed my face in the breeze. I looked to my right and saw the desert sand starting to move and dance in the wind. No wonder his door was closed, I thought. Thanks to the storm, I would need to be back soon as well. I rapped sharply on the wood to make sure he would hear me. I stepped back and waited. A slot in the door cracked open and then quickly closed. The door then swung upward to reveal a dimly lit stall and an elderly man with scraggly beard. He smiled and his face filled with wrinkles. Good to see you, my friend. How is your mother doing? He asked. Not so good, I said. I came to see if you have any more medicinal herbs. The only good news I have is that her fever is gone and she drank some water. He nodded and retreated into the stall. I could hear glass clinking and boxes opening, and a few moments later he was back. He placed the small glass bottles on the counter, and I reached my bag and unloaded my items onto the counter. He smiled and returned, and we both know our parts of the bargain. You can put this in her water. It's tasteless and will dissolve, he said. His gaze shifted behind me. No doubt now the swirling sand was evident. You should get along so you can get stuck in the storm, he said. Thank you, I replied. He pulled up the counter and pulled down the door. I could hear the latch turn as well. I turned and started to trot toward home. By the speed of the wind, I knew that probably didn't have long until the storm started. I made it home in an hour by running. When I reached the door, the sand was all over the place. It embedded itself in the creases in my clothing. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, surrounded by sand. When the door closed, I shook myself off. I heard scratching at the door, but I knew immediately who it was. I went to the door and cracked it open. A skinny orange tabby cat slinked inside and sat to clean himself off. I never did understand why this cat was all the way out here. There weren't many plants or animals for him to eat. He probably went from person to person begging for food. He won my mother over every time. She ended up giving him her scraps. The cat walked down the hallway and stood outside my mother's door. I walked down as well and opened the door for him. He went inside and hopped on her bed, settling in beside her. She was still asleep. I quietly closed the door and decided I would make her keep her word to eat. I went back to the kitchen and lit the fire. I put some ingredients in a pot with water and set it over to cook. It would be about an hour till it was done. I thought, this should be enough time for Mom to sleep. There was nothing else worthwhile to do in the storm outside, so I picked up my book. My father had taught me how to read when I was young. He said because not many people in the outskirts cared to read, I may not find many books. But he had found some I could read. After he died, my mother packed up everything and moved us here. She said that she needed a change of scenery, but my theory was that she didn't want them to find us again. I plopped on my cot and sat out beside the wall. I chose to read a book of my mother's. The cover was so torn and worn that the title was no longer visible. I opened it to feel the limp pages in my hand. I had only been reading for 10 minutes when I felt my eyes begin to droop. Before I know it, I dozed off. I woke up drenched in sweat. It felt as if the room had jumped to 120 degrees. I opened my eyes, trying to adjust, but I was still sleepy. As I became more awake, I started coughing. I could smell smoke. It felt as if it coated my nose and throat. Now that my eyes were adjusted, I looked around the room to see smoke billowing down the hallway, causing my eyes to water. The source of the fire pit was where I had been making my stew. The fire licked and split as it climbed up the wall and throughout the room. The metal it touched glowed hot, red hot, and the wood was singed and starting to turn ashy black. My gaze drew back to the smoke as my mind planned my next move. Mom. I stood quickly, almost falling over from the lack of air. Once I regained my balance, I had to squint through the smoke. It was thicker and higher as I stood. I pulled the blanket off my cot and held it to my mouth and nose as a filter. I walked at a crouch down the hall. It was dark down the hallway and hard to see because of the smoke. I bumped into the wall several times, nearly knocking myself to the ground. Relief washed over me when I reached my mother's door. I reached my hand out, trying to feel the rough wood texture. Once I found myself a handle. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I tried again to no avail. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a fire spit a large pile of flames onto the table at the end of the hall. I needed to get her out now. I turned to my left and ran the door with my right shoulder as hard as I could. My shoulder screamed in pain, but the door remained closed. The fire grabbed for oxygen, suctioning the door closed. I ran the door again with my shoulder, and the door caved. I pushed it in the rest of the way. Smoke instantly filled the room, stinging my eyes more. I had to keep wiping in order to see anything. Once my eyes were clear, I scanned the bed. I did not see the cat, but Mom was laying there, still as a board. I would get her out, and then I would check on what was wrong. I took the cloth I had been using and placed it over her face. I lifted her as carefully as I could and headed for the door. I was unable to crouch while holding her, so I bounced from wall to wall down the hallway. Near the end, it was easier to see, but the pathway was littered with fire. I rubbed my eyes on my upper arms and shoulders to clear the tears that were streaming. I looked out at the walls, debating on how hard I had to ram them to come down. Most of them were glowing red by now. No chance of that. I would just have to run through. I hugged my mother as tight as I could to my chest and ran for the door. The fire didn't bother me at first, but when it caught my pants and started to melt my shoes, I turned and ran the door with my shoulder. It didn't budge. I tried again. I began to panic from the lack of oxygen and the abundance of pain. I then tried turning as I was facing away from the door and fell back against it. The door burst open, and I fell to the ground with a swift thud. The fall knocked the wind out of my chest. I dropped Mom and rolled around gasping for air and coughing simultaneously as it coated my throat and rejected fresh air. After what I felt like forever, I gained back my lungs and was able to breathe slowly breaths without coughing. I rolled on my side looking for Mom. Thankfully, the sandstorm had stopped. I thought bitterly, or we would have another problem. I spotted Mom a foot away. She was on her stomach, facing away from me. I pulled myself over to her and reached out to grab her. She has to be okay, I hoped fervently. She has to. Suddenly, a searing pain behind my ear forced me to scream out. I rolled around, patting my head, trying to find the source. My shallow breathing was making me dizzy, and I felt as I was going to pass out. Then a shadow loomed over me. I looked at it, trying to focus. I couldn't make out the person's face or physical features. I could only see that he or she wore black. I could feel myself fading. I fought to keep my eyes open, but I was fading fast. I felt something rough scraping my cheek, and I fidgeted at first until my eyes opened. Meow. I opened my eyes and found myself staring at the orange tabby cat. Of course. This cat would be here expecting a handout. He sat on my my chest, purring, and his eyes slowly closed. My head pounded. I needed water. I looked at the sky above me, trying to figure out where I was. A small trail of smoke billowed to my left, slowly swirling into the sky. Is someone cooking something? All that smoke was going to attract people. I tilted my head up to find the source, and the world spun. It felt as if I was on a large wheel, and my stomach warned me I was going to puke any minute. Not a good sign. I tried to breathe to fight the nausea, but that only made me cough terribly. My throat ached as if he was swallowing sand. I needed water. The cat's eyes opened alarmed. He was scared about what I was going to do next, and so was I. I then felt weight on my legs. Looking up, I could see the orange tabby cat had gotten comfortable further down on my body. Well, I mused, it's a good thing that one of us is feeling fine. I just need to lie here for a bit and let the nausea pass. Hopefully it'll be over soon. I tilted my head to the right to look around the ground, gasping as a sharp pain zapped through my brain. I reached my hand up and felt an object behind my ear. Something came back with a brief flash. There was a fire. I got Mom out. Then there was a man. Wait, where's Mom? I tried to tilt my head again, only feeling more pain. It felt as if something was lodged in my head. I needed to get that thing out of me. I reached up and gently touched around the area. I could feel my soaked hair. When I touched it again, it winced in pain as it brought. It was small, but there wasn't enough of a piece of the end of it to grab it. I grabbed it and pulled. As I pulled, I could feel the pain subside slightly. There was a wet feeling as blood was coming out of the exit point. I pulled the object to my left hand and used my right hand to cover the wound. I could feel the blood flowing over my fingers. It was a head wound, so it would bleed more. I remember Mom saying that. I needed to stop it and slow down. I looked around me to do the best I could without moving my head. I saw a blackened cloth. It was dirty, but I had no other choice. I grabbed it and propped it by my ear and laid my head on top of the balled-up cloth. That was as good as it was going to get for now. Once the bleeding was under control, I lifted the object into my line of view. It was a rectangular shape with soft edges. At the end of the object was a sharp, needle-like point. I had utterly no idea what it was. I heard noises to my far left and quickly disposed of the item in my pocket. I couldn't tell what those noises were exactly. I closed my eyes, hoping no one would come bother me. I sat there quietly listening. There were distinct crunches and snaps of firewood here and there. I heard a clang of metal. More flashes of memory started to come to me. The fire. So much smoke. It was my home that was on fire. That must be where I am. How long I've been asleep. Shut up. If you keep making all that noise, someone will hear us over here for sure, a man hissed. Oh, please. As if you were completely silent, the woman replied. There were sounds of bangs and snaps of burnt metal materials sounding from a few feet away. They didn't talk for a long time. I was about to open my eyes when they spoke again. Sarah, I think we're done here. We got all that's salvageable. Let's get out of here before anyone else shows up and has the same idea, the man said. Look over there. There's a guy, said the woman. Crap. I laid as still as possible, hoping they would write me off as dead. I slowed my breathing, only taking in small breaths, killing my searing throat and lungs. He's probably dead. Looks like we must have raided his house. And to look at that, a cat is guarding him. He's waiting for the rest of the family to come to eat him, the man replied. Maybe he has something on him, the woman suggested. I needed to figure out what to do. There was only one way to take the object from me, and then I would have no lead of what was happening. I started to feel the weight of the cat shift in my legs. I could hear the sound of their feet thudding loudly against the ground as they came closer. See his blood by his head? I think he bled out, said the man. The cat started hissing at them. Stupid cat, get! The man yelled. The cat still stayed still, and his hissing and growling continued. Their footsteps stopped near me. I tried to be as still as I could. It was hard to do, considering I felt all the adrenaline in my body was radiating everywhere. I heard something flying through the air, and the cat's weight lifted off my legs. Something landed on the other side of me. They must have thrown a rock at the cat or something. A foul smell hit my nose. It was as if someone hadn't bathed in months. One of them was most likely looking over me. I didn't feel any hands, though, which was good. He doesn't look like he has anything on him. Let's go. You said it yourself. Someone might be on their way by now, the woman said urgently. He huffed. Okay, let me check his pockets so we can go. Now or never. I opened my eyes and saw him looking in my pocket. His head was directly above mine. I launched my head forward fast and hard, connecting with his nose. He screamed and fell back, covering his nose. The woman lunged at me a second too late. I bolted up as she dove down and hit the ground hard. She squirmed on the ground, trying to catch her breath. I took in the scene before me. The man looked at me with round eyes. He looked as if he hadn't eaten in days. The woman was starting to regain her strength, so it was time to leave. I felt wobbly at first, the world slightly on a tilt all around me. If my body was trying to get me used to being vertical, it was going to need to catch up. And catch up quick, I thought. I started to run. It began awkward at first, but after a moment I started to gain speed. I could feel my feet pound against the ground as I ran faster and faster. I felt like I was 7 again, on the day my father died. Instead of running into danger this time, I was running away from it. Well, that was the first chapter of Kale Stone and Outliers Tale. If you've read it before, I was glad to have given you guys some more insight into the chapter. And if you haven't, feel free to check out Amazon to purchase my story. All right, thank you.